Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Pallavi Sharma. I go by the pronoun she, her, hers. I'm very thankful to Creative Citizens in Action initiative at CCA for this wonderful opportunity to organize and host this workshop in conjunction with my Asian American Narratives class, Catalyst for Change, Spring 2022. I'm very happy to see all my students here today and you all to be part of our workshop, our Share Your Slice two-part workshop, which focuses on Asian American and African American solidarity, facilitated by two wonderful established artists, Ellen Bepp and Tomyé Neal-Madison. Thank you so much, Ellen and Tomyé, for accepting my invitation and joining us today. Very excited to have you with us. Before we get started with the workshop, I would like to begin with land acknowledgement. California College of the Art campuses are located in Houston and Yalem, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, respectively, on the unceded territories of Chicheneo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous people in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from the ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destructions of their communities and culture. CCA honors Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. If you are unsure of whose land you are currently residing upon, we encourage you to visit nativeland.ca. Thank you.
Thank you for
that. As I said earlier, this program is part of the Creative Citizens in Action initiative at CCA and is funded by endowment gift to support the Deborah and Kenneth Novick Creative Citizens series, an annual series of public programs focused on creative activism. The 2021 to 2022 Creative Citizens in Action theme, Fluid Mutualism, investigate intergenerational symbiotic relationships, networks, and strategies expanding within different communities, species, disciplines, and territories, coordinated by Professor V. Very thankful to her, as well as Brindis and Jamie for all the support and work. Thank you so much. In this workshop, our Share Your Slice, Tomyé and Ellen will converse about their comparable and contrasting life experiences, which presently connects them due to political issues that inform their advocacy. Afterwards, the participants will be guided to share their ideas about the subject of collaborative cross-cultural support. The outcome is for everyone's input to be included in a toolkit that will outline how to achieve impactful advocacy as either a highly visible mural, billboard, or wrap around skins on utility boxes or bus. Before we get started, I would like to read out short bios of Tomyé and Ellen Bepp for you all. Let me get started with Tomyé's bio. Tomyé Neal-Madison is a visual storyteller. Tomyé moved from Philadelphia to San Francisco after receiving a BFA from Moore College of Art and Design in 1973. During the 1990s, Tomyé participated in Women's Initiative for Self-Employment and received an MFA certificate in Public Arts Administration from Golden Gate University in San Francisco. Tomyé served as acting director and subsequently director of the nonprofit gallery Oakland Center for Visual Arts, CVA, from 1992 to 1999. Tomyé has also worked with the City of Oakland's Park and Recreation Department as visual arts specialist instructor, interacting and listening to youth and adult students who speak different languages. Tomyé began shifting the imagery in her ink drawings, gouache paintings, collages, and few slumped glasswork artworks. From thing and facades to people partaking in universal light-hearted experiences. During the 2000s, her images included depiction of disheartening movements and people raising voices for change. Thank you, Tomyé, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Ellen Bepp. Ellen Bepp is an Oakland-based visual artist and taiko musician. Since the 1980s, her mixed media work, wearable art, and hand-cut paper have been exhibited nationally in museums and galleries. Her art speaks from her experience as a Japanese American, calling out for social justice and addressing the legacy of World War II American concentration camps. She first learned about Japanese art and culture from her immigrant grandparents who immigrant grandparents who practiced the Japanese arts, and she draws inspiration from that rich source. Her subsequent interest in the folk art traditions of Asia and Latin America led her to textile art research in Peru, indigenous communities, and humanitarian exchanges in Guatemala, Peru, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Those connections inform her work, which honors ancestral wisdom and focuses on issues of displacement, identity, and memory. Very warm welcome to you, Ellen. Over to you to conduct the workshop. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Give a big round of applause for, Ellen and Tomyé.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. We really appreciate you all for coming. And before I begin, Tomyé and I would like to thank Professor Pallavi Sharma for this opportunity to be a part of the Creative Citizens series. We are very pleased to be here. So first of all, I'm going to run down our plan for today. First, as Pallavi said, we're going to be sharing, Tomyé and I are going to be sharing stories and images, and we'll split about 30 minutes today and 30 minutes Thursday. And today we're going to begin with the present and move back to the 1980s. On Thursday, we'll start with our growing up years in the 1950s and move up to the 80s. And then that will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. So we encourage you all to be writing your questions and comments in the chat. Then we're going to pose 4 questions, and we're going to go into breakout rooms with 4 wonderful volunteers who are going to help facilitate those breakout rooms and take notes. And that'll be for about 20 minutes. And then we'll come back to the big group for another 20 minutes. And hopefully you'll all get a chance to share what you talked about. And then after that, and then we would like you to be thinking about ideas of what you'd like to put into the toolkit, as Pallavi had mentioned earlier. And we'll just briefly talk about that and continue on Thursday. And the very last thing today is we're going to have a very, very, very brief homework assignment. It's not, please don't be overwhelmed. This is just to get everyone thinking and reflecting and hopefully digesting what we say today. And we'll talk about that on Thursday. So with that, I'm going to get started with my section. And I will move this slide along. And oh, it's going crazy. And I'll say first that my art medium has been evolving for the last 40 or so years, from wearable and textile art to theatrical set design and costuming, performance, mixed media, and hand-cut paper. And today I'll be showing you just a few samples. I'll begin with my most recent series of collages. In the midst of the barrage of news of anti-Asian hate incidents in the last few years, I was moved to create this art. And then last year, after the murder of 6 Asian women at the spas in Atlanta, I wanted to pay tribute to their lives, and I created these 6 collage pieces. The lower panels of each are dedicated to honoring the Black Lives Matter movement, and I fused those panels to the portraits of the women to show solidarity and unity. After George Floyd's murder, I built this altar to honor him and the many Black lives that have been lost to police violence. These are hand-cut paper portraits of people, most of whom I'm sure you recognize, but I wanted to represent more women's portraits since they generally are not acknowledged as much. Soon after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, I needed to express my response to that tragedy. For me, art is a way that I process my feelings. So I found the names of 100 unarmed African-American men and women who were murdered only in the year 2014, and I cut out their names from one piece of Black paper. It was an extremely cathartic process, but a way that I hoped would bring attention to these racist murders. This installation piece of my grandmother's flower vase on her table was included in an exhibit at the Presidio in San Francisco that addressed the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. I altered a civilian exclusion poster used in 1942 to order their forced removal. The words, "I am an American," are hand cut into a poster which emerges from the vase that she used for creating her traditional Japanese flower arrangements. The vase is filled with sand, conjuring up images of the barren desert wastelands of the World War II camps. Next are 3 more of my hand-cut paper pieces. This is the text of my grandfather's will that he wrote while he was imprisoned during the war. I use this medium to give more weight to the words. To me, it creates a tension between a formal artistic rendering contrasted against a serious, tragic topic. La Venganza de los Milagros. I created this piece during the time of Trump's building of the border wall with Mexico. In Spanish, venganza means revenge, and milagro means miracle, like a lucky talisman. The milagros I depict have transformed into a unified force, bursting through walls that separate nations and people. I pay tribute to the courageous migrants and asylum seekers who continue to struggle to defy persecution. This piece is entitled Unity, and it's dedicated to the late Yuri Kochiyama, one of our highly respected leaders of the civil rights and progressive movements in this country and the world. I pay tribute to her call for unity that will live on and continue to empower future generations and influence young people, hopefully today. The white text is an excerpt from her speech entitled Mothers and Daughters. And the Black text in the center is the word unity translated into 62 languages. Besides my hand-cut paperwork, I've also created many mixed media collages that address social justice issues or simply describe personal stories about everyday life. The louder side of silence is dedicated to the memory of my maternal grandparents, whom I was too young to know. And Where Compassion Breathes is a plea to practice compassion to bring about world peace and transformation. So one thing that I've enjoyed all my life has been traveling. I've been very fortunate for these opportunities to be inspired by other ways of life and cultural art practices. Besides Asian textiles, I became drawn to pre-Columbian weaving and folk art and developed a kinship and deep respect. These are samples of my collection from various Latin American weaving centers that I visited. Then in 2014 and 2015, I was awarded 2 artist residencies in Oaxaca, Mexico. There I started experimenting with natural dyes and hand-cut paper. I was inspired by the traditional paper cutout banners called papel picado and bark paper called amate in Spanish, made by the Otomi Indigenous peoples. Then I took a hiatus from my studio artwork and I co-founded a touring taiko company, and that was between 1999 and 2009. We named ourselves Someyoshi no Taiko Ensemble after a beautiful cherry blossom tree in Japan. These photos are from stage performances when we toured throughout California, the Pacific Northwest, the Southwest, and a few cities in Japan. I also designed the costumes and some of the sets. And on Thursday, I could tell you more about the traditional drums. Then during the 1990s, much of my artwork addressed issues of social injustice and specifically the incarceration of Japanese Americans in World War II. My family was also imprisoned, and on Thursday, I'll talk more about their experience. The next 5 mixed media assemblages deal with the camps and America's history of anti-Asian hate. This is the name of my paternal grandmother, Sumi Bepp, and her incarceration story. Before the war, she was a floral artist, kimono designer, and seamstress, and one of my artistic inspirations. This is my grandfather Kiroku's incarceration story. He enjoyed playing the Japanese board game called Go, a game of intense strategy, attacks, and counterattacks, like those used in war. The recent anti-Asian hate incidents are nothing new, as we all know. This is a memorial to Asians in America who have been victims of anti-Asian hatred and violence since the early days of immigration. Slips of paper reminiscent of paper fortunes hang horizontally on delicate wires. But as you can see in the detail, the writings on each slip are not fortunes, but instead racial slurs or actual dated hate crimes perpetrated against Asians in this country. Angel Island Immigration Prison was active from 1910 to 1940, right here in the Bay. These pieces are dedicated to immigrants from Asia trying to enter the US who were imprisoned on Angel Island right here, sometimes indefinitely. And at this point, I wanted to insert images of 2 of my pieces that were included in an exhibit back in 1994 when I first met Tomyé. She curated this show that was called Stop the Violence. And sadly, here we are 28 years later, still calling for an end to violence. But I have to say it was a pleasure working with her then, and as it has been during this project. I've also followed and supported Indigenous movements, particularly in the Americas, and created work to address that struggle. This and the next piece I show you were included in a show at the Mission Cultural Center in 1992, marking the 500th year of Christopher Columbus's invasion of the Americas. This piece incorporates upcycled wood panels, soil, and cement, and it's a prayer for truth, exposing the betrayal of the lost tribes of Native peoples in North America. Their names bleed through the invisible ink made legible. This piece is based on the Native American religion of the ceremonial ghost dance, practiced among many tribes in the late 1800s. The belief was that a time would come when the whole Indian race would be reunited and be able to live a life of happiness, free from death, disease, and misery after contact with a white man. This painting honors those who perished throughout the Americas and beyond. I also traveled in southern Mexico, in the state of Chiapas, where the Zapatista indigenous movement for liberation has been in progress for many decades. These two pieces honor the Zapatista rebels and mark the massacre of 45 indigenous people by federal troops in 1997. My other subject matter at this time reflected the sacred sites I'd been visiting while traveling in Mexico and Central America. For these next four pieces, I was working with materials like sand, plaster, inks, acrylics, handmade paper, watercolors, and upcycled found objects. Then, in 1990, I joined AWA, the Asian American Women Artists Association, and I tapped into an amazing and empowering world of artists. This organization is alive and very well today, thanks to the new generation of artists who are carrying the torch, and they are standing on the shoulders of some amazing AWA leaders and icons pictured here. Around that time, I was also fortunate to be included in an exhibit curated by African-American artist Carol Henry called Our History, Our Rituals, examining the connections between African-American and Asian American artists. And I'd like to read her curatorial statement. As an African-American woman, artist, curator, my interest is to bring forth ideas that are underrepresented in the visual art mainstream. As an educational tool, the show demystifies and humanizes our work and ideas to those in our communities who need to know more about who we are. Spirits emanate in our visual interpretations of these concerns. My desire is that you regard this work in connection to your own experience. My hope is to increase a dialogue that will build bridges toward greater understanding and respect. Today, Carol Henry Alexander continues as an arts, culture, and environmental activist, community leader, and all-around creative force. And finally, my last image for today. This is the facade of the Live Work Lofts that I co-established in 1988, right here in Oaktown, Oakland, where my studio is still located. Thank you for listening, and I will pass the torch or the baton to Tomyé. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. That was wonderful. Hopefully people will put questions or comments in the chat. And there was a question at the very beginning that we'd like you to ponder and put your response to as well. And we'll, at some point after the Q&A, I'll tackle the questions that are in the chat. Okay, and anything else that's in the chat. So I'm obviously Tomyé Neal-Madison. I'm welcoming you for allowing time to hear our share and speaking of ideas for your slice of advocacy seated in love, because it's important. It shouldn't just be a couple of us. It should be the whole community that's interested in figuring out ways that we can address all the unnecessary discord that's happening. And thank you, California College of Arts Professor Pallavi Sharma, for pairing me with Ellen, who, as she has mentioned, we have worked before, and I've seen her work in various places, and I think she's an extraordinary artist and activist. And we're going to reveal, as she said, portions of our life experiences. And I agree, we're starting from the present and moving back in time to about 1980. On Thursday, we plan to start at the beginning and conclude about the 1980s. So we'll be coming up to, and as kind of a seamless where we left off. If you have comments, as I said, please put it in the chat and we'll take care of that during the Q&A portion. So this is just a brief background of my interests, which influenced my art and art advocacy. This year, I will have concluded 8 years on Oakland's Mayor's Commission on Aging, since I'm getting older too, as well as Alameda County Public Art Advisory Committee. I also completed an 8-year term as Alameda County's Art Commissioner. During this decade, I joined the Northern California Women's Caucus for the Arts. And prior to COVID, I visited local Philadelphia, New York galleries and museums and art centers. Some of the artists I admire are Martin Puryear, Enrique Segoya, Frida Kahlo, Mildred Howard, Elizabeth Catlett, Kehinde Wiley, Albert Dürer, Hiroshige Wakasai, and El Anatsu. And I'm influenced by TED Talks. Like, I've come of age where I, like a lot of people, watch TED Talks, Netflix movies, and documentaries. So NPR, KCBS, and KPFA are radio stations I enjoy listening to and learning from, and lots of artists of various cultures. So I'm going to introduce my images and let you know that these are representative of, well, some of them are representative of subjects that I grapple with, meaning that I think everybody has to find a way that they feel comfortable doing advocacy. Some can walk and do their protests in the street in front of people. I'm of an age that I now have problems with my knees, so I don't like walking anymore, even though I was an extraordinary walker when I was in my youth. But you just have to figure out, hopefully by the end of this presentation, how it is that you can advocate for human rights. So I'm going to begin. So the emphasis of this particular artwork called Her Pal with Pals is, it's a mixed media, and with the subsequent title, the cameo paintings that I hope you can see in the middle of the painting are representative of Coretta Scott King, Maxine Waters, Angela Davis, Barbara Lee, and Michelle Obama, going from left to right. And these were and are political activists, obviously African-American women. And each realized humane legislation is pivotal to change. Now, some of you may be familiar with the game of Monopoly, and within this painting, this is actually a detail of a much larger painting, but to the, I would say, above the second shelf, there is a card that came out of Monopoly called Get Out of Jail. And it's an onerous subject. It's what we continuously fight with, regardless of what culture we're coming from. Unfortunately, a lot of people, mainly people of brown, you know, there are some people who, I don't like to use the phrase people of color, because as a painter, I realize that white and pink are colors. So I'm going to try to be fair to my fellow friends who are white or pink, that when we talk about this honorable way that people are treated, it includes white and pink people as well, but it's just lopsided because a lot of brown folks have so much to deal with from the day that they're born. So that's why I mentioned that. And this game with this card, I wonder why it was necessary, particularly since this was about housing. So outside this living history, the economic inequity continues to make it difficult to realize house ownership. The detail on the right is what you can see in the painting on the left, and it's called Enduring Spirit. And it is necessary that we have an enduring spirit because we're constantly seemingly to not have a smooth life. It's what people say, you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So we have I have a depiction of children that are sheltered in place during 2020 when COVID was first announced to us. And the red mantle represents the Republican stronghold, supporting items including a derogatory blackface clock. The white columns support the mantle representing white extremists, and the narrow bands of blue strips represent the Democrats' limited power, which is my interpretation of, unfortunately, what's happening with our politics. Humanity means correcting wrongs. Imagery is always important. The backplate on a pinball machine, which is what this is depicting, and on the left, it's the original backplate, and on the right is my interpretation. The one on the left is stereotypical images of women. They're usually very slender, blonde hair, blue eye, that kind of depiction. And the one on the right is a closer version to the reality. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, where women come in different sizes and shapes and colors. So when I arrived in the San Francisco Bay Area, this picture, man-child in a promised land, again, is another detail. And on the upper right, the young woman who is a child in her father's oversized shoes, being supported by her mother. And also the same woman is a teenager sculpting a bit of, I forgot what the product is, but she's sculpting an image of her father and her brother. So they were a very small family. And she was the person who told me directly that, I missed my place, that as a child, she experienced her family's disruptive life by the city's redevelopment agency. From research, I learned about this travesty that at the same time, San Francisco's Japanese residents experienced systematic racism, which escalated when the Executive Order 9066, which Ellen had mentioned, by President Franklin Roosevelt, resulted in the internment of all Japanese citizens. And think about that for a minute. All Japanese citizens. Just think, whatever culture you are, somebody decides in the higher up politics that they're going to tell all of you to move off the land, or not just move, but help you to, I don't even know if help is the right word, but move you to some outpost somewhere that you have virtually nothing that is comfortable that you're used to. So what I was told when this happened is that many Japanese managed, and this is in San Francisco, managed to have a way for their homes to be cared for by African Americans. Recognizing people inhabit the earth with other life spurs all sorts of conversations about conservation, you know, depending on who you talk to, and there'll be different people on different sides of their belief of what it means to conserve not only ourselves, but those life forces that keep us living. So my two fused glass artworks, and fused glass is something I can talk more about if anybody has a question, focus on the effects of climate change and the need to inform resistant people to change before we experience innumerable uncontrollable catastrophes. Now, when for some of the years that I worked with the city of Oakland as a visual artist specialist, which was well, I can't say it was a fancy term for instructor because I did more than just instruct. The image on the left was a flyer that I had created. So I also did graphic arts for the city of Oakland Parks and Rec, and I also taught art to youth and adults, curated exhibits, and assisted with special community events. On the right is a mural on the basement wall, if it's still there, because I retired in 2014, so this is 2022, so they could have whitewashed it. But it was a testament of my love for mentoring youth, which I still continue to today. Actually, I mentor anybody. My heart was a little lighter then. This is during 2000 to 2010, when I go home and endure commercials to watch Everybody Loves Raymond, House, West Wing, ER, Frasier, Friends, King of Queens, and on occasion, a Simpson. Expanding my knowledge of artistic cultural differences began with joining art organizations. Such was the involvement with the National League of American Penwomen. Within a meeting of the local Bay Area branch is where I met Pallavi Sharma, who you can see on the left, with her older son. And obviously, this is a younger picture because our older son, I forgot what age he is now, but I think he's a young adult. And behind them is one of Pallavi's incredible artworks. And there actually is a monitor that has a video going that in that blue section that looks like it might be the eye. And on the right is a child adding an origami boat. When I met Pallavi, I was so taken with the fact that she was such an exceptional installation artist. I became fascinated with her distinctive approach of depicting subjects that caused discord. After attending a couple of her exhibits, I asked if she'd reinstalled this particular artwork within the Malanga Cascalora Center for the Arts, where I also curated shows for the Oakland Parks and Rec. And she said yes. As I mentioned, I have a fondness for youth, and Paige was one of the students who decided to draw me, which I've got some really wonderful interpretations of how I look. The other image is of one of Oakland Parks and Rec special summer hire, which happened every year for people who wanted to, usually teenage and older. I mean, I think the oldest person who ever responded to a call for summer hire was in their 70s. So that was pretty incredible. And certainly there were times that I could join in and having fun and reflect about innocence when looking at a drawing of me by Paige. Thinking was always done best when I interacted with others. These are images, forgive me. These are images of, oops, I just pulled up the wrong thing. That's what happens when you're reading from script. These are images that from a trip I took that involved trains, plane, and buses to reach the destination of Copper Canyon, located in the legendary Sierra Madre Mountains within Chihuahua. I very much enjoyed seeing a demonstration of creating Black clay ceramic pottery. Many of the indigenous people we did see were impoverished and tips were expected. This was a vacation for me, but I learned how it felt to be viewed as a tourist. That experience was new for me, the only African-American of the group that I was with. I singled out one of the exhibits that I attended only because it was one of the rare times that I saw a collaboration between San Francisco Jewish Museum and African artists, African-American artists. Relegated to the second tier status by the well-supported private galleries, grassroots galleries, there is a distinction of galleries that really commit themselves to the community versus galleries that are private usually and want to sell what they call high-end art more for investment than for appreciation of what the art is telling you. So in these typically art centers, city museums like Berkeley, Oakland, El Cerrito, etc., they show stirring contemporary art that is relevant to working artists. Collaboration or themes are always insightful. So I have a question, and I know some of you, well, a number of you are probably before 9/11, younger, but I had a question of where were you on 9/11? Perhaps a trivial question, but I was into my 15th year teaching art at Studio One Art Center, and I was heading to the downtown office at City Center. I saw the slow buildup of tents in front of City Hall. This was a protest of many people allied with others opposing the flagrant greed of Wall Street, known as Occupy Wall Street. People in the rallies voiced their frustrations about the greater financial inequities burdening Oakland residents, the cousin city of affluent San Francisco, as I like to call it. The last part of my title, Melts, which is a very old term, are disruptors of other people's lives. Now I'm in the early 2000s, and the gays on the upper left and the piano company on the lower right, my work was, I could do my work because I had a traditional job that was 9 to 5. So I had time to draw while I was in transit. I'm not a driver, so I had the opportunity to be able to draw people as they were either going on the bus or the BART or whatever. And it's an acrobatic feat to be able to hold on to a sketchbook and draw people, but I really enjoyed it. So I did a lot while attending music events and seeing people working and etc. So many of us live in the area where we can allow ourselves to relax in the public as we do what we do. During a life journey, there are challenges and unforeseen havoc, as we all probably have witnessed. Even our younger in the audience, I'm quite sure that there's unfortunate things that have happened that you'd rather they didn't. Yet the beauty of creating eases you. Whatever that you're studying, whatever form of your life is going to take, you have to make sure you have some easy moments in it. So I suggested that people review the people in the audience, the students, as well as the people in the audience, to review Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble, the music of strangers, which our tech person, Brandeis, will put in the chat, that title, so that you can remember it. And it is worth your time. It's an hour and a half, but you can watch it in segments. And then we're going to ask on Thursday your feedback of what you felt about that particular film. It's very telling of what we are experiencing. And then the last one that I have, the amazing beauty and marvel of a hummingbird reappears in my art from time to time. It represents to me peace of mind. We continue to augment, or I continue to augment my advocacy art with propagating love. And that's what the hummingbird means to me. It's such a fleeting, quick, if you've ever had the experience of watching a hummingbird, it's just awesome. And it's propagating love and understanding cultural differences is important to me. And so I leave the question, how will you? And thank you. Oh, forgive me. I forgot. I have 5 more. Oh, I didn't. Let me do this. Forgive me. It's going to be a technical break here because I didn't bring up the right ones. I might have to ad lib on this. Let me make sure I have. You know what? I think I will have to ad lib. So bear with me, Ellen. I'm sorry, I don't have the right page up. So on the left is African antiquity, and on the right is an Asian antiquity. The reason why I've included these is I think it's very important for people to understand that you learn from various sources. And in this particular one, it's from a museum visit. I think this is actually at the De Young in San Francisco. So in my youth, there were no such thing as, I can't, let me rephrase this, because there's always been museums, but my family didn't do a lot of socializing. So what I learned was through encyclopedias, and this is so much better. So I want to encourage everyone to open up themselves to learning about different cultures by going to the museum. Support your local museum. A lot of them have free days for the public. So if you have a wait, if it's not cost effective for you, don't let that stop you. Just go on the free days. Ellen, can you go to the next one, please? So I still have all my marbles. Now this is an interesting title because it's actually an older phrase that I don't think young people use, but to the extreme left is an artist mannequin, which some of you may be familiar with, atop this shelf. And then there's a candle and a vase that has different dried flowers, but at the bottom of the vase, you'll see little circular things. They represent marbles. And I thought, after I did this painting, I thought, oh, what a perfect title, because there are times when you want to make sure that you don't get stressed. And I still have all my marbles is alluding to that I try to balance myself and make sure that I don't go too far in whatever I'm doing so that I can manage to have some control over my life. The monkeys were given to me by a friend. A book is leaning on a small ceramic bowl. Beneath the shelf is actually a depiction of myself and my older brother and my oldest sister when we were toddlers. Thank you, Ellen. Head chakra, for those that may not know, the body is made up of different regions of chakra, referred to as chakras. The head is one of the most important parts, obviously, because it holds our brain, and people refer to left brain, right brain. When you use your left brain, you want to make sure that not only are you being creative and doing the things that you need to do to ease yourself, but you balance it with your right brain so that you are being informed correctly. Do the things that you know that you need to do so that you react to people in a humane way. This young man just happened to be someone I chanced upon, and I was so impressed with that. He was not using foul language. He was doing a usual thing that young men do, which was trying to pick up on a woman, but he was respectful in how he was doing it. And around him are different quotes that are notable and from people who are notable. And they're just saying different things about what we as a humanity need to be aware of as one person to another. And this is gouache on cork, which was an experiment for me because I never painted on cork before. And cork is very absorbent. So I had to put a lot of paint over a lot of paint over a lot of paint to finally come up with this image. And this, what I see when, this is such a disheartening description of a woman who is locked up for life for supposedly a crime she didn't commit. And I saw this in the gallery at Moore College of Art, where I graduated from. And the whole show just showed political artwork that was so disheartening because it was mainly women and who were caught up in these various situations and then wound up being imprisoned either for a long time or their entire life. You know, it's just very disheartening that people are caught up because the penal system is based on if you have enough money that you can get an attorney or have a compassionate judge or somebody who really wants to step in and save you from the penal system. So I included this as another realm of what is a quandary to me of I know there are now efforts to change the parole system, the bail system, the privatizing of jails, the whole works. And it's probably going to take another couple of decades at least to just dismantle it and come up with something better. And then, is this my last one?
Yes.
And then ending on something more lighthearted in a sense. This is another gouache painting, but it's done on my I usually use museum board, what people usually use as matting, because it's got a great surface and is relatively smooth. I prefer smooth rather than textured surfaces. This is gouache used in a more, I want to say watercolor way, because it's more transparent than other ways that you can use gouache, which is really what is the beauty of it. So I tried to represent different cultures in this. So you'll see a woman in the clouds who's Asian, and a little girl who could be anybody's little girl, and the woman in the middle who takes the biggest focus, aside from the larger, younger woman above who's a teenager, is African American. Then another little girl kind of hugging the face of a Native American, and then a little girl holding these beautiful flowers who is more or less Guatemalan, and the woman whose mouth is being cupped by the little girl who is European. And so there are symbols at the very top that represent different cultures. My reason for painting this, and when I painted it, I actually got goosebumps when I finished, was to show that a lot of cultures, if they just keep in mind, we all pretty much want the same thing, is just to have a good life, be well, and share our wealth of everything, knowledge, whatever we have, with other people. And I wanted to conclude on a lighter note. So that is me. And thank you, Ellen. Thank you. So we're starting the Q&A section. And I'm checking the chat, and I see one, it's not even a question. Out of curiosity, oh yes, it is a question. Hi all, this is really lovely panel. Out of curiosity, how much of your art is informed by academic research versus live experiences? Ellen, you want to tackle that one first, and then I'll do mine?
I would say well, it's both, but usually my initial motivation to create a piece of work comes from direct experience. And then sometimes before I start creating, I will do a lot of research and finding out background of what I'm tackling. But it's for me, it's definitely a combination of the two, but mine starts from the heart. And I guess you'd say that's more from just direct life experience.
Mm-hmm.
Tomyé?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. The works, like I would say the very first work that was about the activist African-American women that are in politics, I did research on those women and getting those images. So that did require some academic research in the sense of I wanted it to be accurate. I'm interpreting academic as more accurate, and that live experiences is primarily, like Ellen said, I have to have interest in that particular topic to really want to get involved in doing an artwork. So that, and I equate that with live experiences, that they're when the Occupy Oakland, is what I like to call it, happened, that was enormous. I mean, that got so out of hand and so much destruction happened, unfortunately, afterwards, that it couldn't be avoided. And because I work with the city of Oakland, they actually sent out a email telling us not to come into the downtown office because things got so terrible. So it's definitely live experiences that inform me, and then I interpret in my own way. Oh, here's another question. I hope that answered your question, Selma. Okay, so for both of you, for when it comes to execution of final art pieces, what does your prep work look like before going straight to creating the art piece in terms of sketches, notes, etc.? Or is your personal process more instinctual and you find a design meaning along the way? You want to take that, Ellen?
Sure. For me, definitely I start with sketches, or, well, for most of my work, but I have to say when I work on the collage pieces that I showed that utilize handmade paper and vintage textiles and drawing and printing, that those pieces are more instinctual. I will start with just a sense of where I'm going, but I don't map it out. And so I'm really working with the materials and putting them together. Generally, some of the collages, I have an idea of where I'm going, but I don't know how I'm going to get there till I start working with the materials. So the materials dictate. But then on the other hand, when I do a hand cut paper piece, I do sketches and then I hand draw first on paper, and then I cut, because I don't cut straight. I can't do letters straight with a knife onto the black paper. I have to draw it out first. What are some others? So more of the assemblages and collages, the materials are more important. And with a lot of the pieces I did to for my incarceration stories, those I did have an original idea, but I just put it together as I went along. I hope that answers your question. Tomyé, how about you?
I would almost say exactly the same thing. The distinction that I can make is that the painting work, which is usually gouache or gouache and ink, and every so often mixed media, like the one of the activist women, the drawing on the very bottom, which is of a man, it's hard for people to see it initially. And then I've had some interesting interpretations of it. So the man that is on the, if I can say the layers, the bottom layer is reading a newspaper, and he has a string tied around his finger, and Pinocchio is dangling from his hand. And people will ask me, why is that? And why did I put that in that painting? And Pinocchio represents a liar, for anybody who knows the story. And that's how I feel that most politicians, in order to manage their lives, at some point they have to lie, because they are trying to calm the populace by finding the best way to tell a story, more or less. And that story may not be what the population wants to hear, but they have to figure out how to put it into a term where it's palatable. So anyway, that involved a lot of sketching, pre-sketching with ink. When I sketch, I actually sketch with ink. I don't know why. I would never really like using a pencil, even though I teach people to use a pencil and then erase it and redo it. But for me, I just use ink to do my sketches and then do my painting. As far as the glass is very experimental. I do cold working glass, which is different than hot blowing glass. When you see people who have when they talk about blown glass for vases and things of that nature, it's usually hot glass. It's a different process, hot glass and cold working. So I do cold working, which means I cut my glass pieces, put it in a kiln, which some people consider like an oven, and turn up the degrees to like anywhere between 1200 to 1500 degrees, determine the amount of time it needs to stay in there, and then leave it in there overnight so it can cool, and then look at what I have as a result. So with those hummingbirds in particular, the one, I should say the one that is in glass, that is what I'm explaining now. And that doesn't come up with a sketch. I don't pre-sketch my glass work. I just play with the glass, put it in the kiln, and hope that it comes out the way that I anticipate. So we have another question from, let's see, that was sketches. We have Marion Wilson says, you both use various mediums. Do certain mediums, materials represent certain subjects or symbolize anything to you, or what draws you to one medium material over the other? Are you still thinking about that, Ellen? I can take it if you want, and that you can follow me. So draws you to one medium over another. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I really love to paint. I've done that since I was 6 years old. So I really love to paint, but I also am fond of working in glass. But because the glass is not as spontaneous, because I have to cut the pieces and think about like decide what it is I'm making, cut the pieces and put them in the kiln and wait a whole nother day to see what I have. I do less of glass than I do of painting, because a painting is, for me, so spontaneous, especially using gouache, which I've used for so long that I now know the amount of water that'll give me a certain effect and how long to leave it. And then I can put another color over top and not lift the previous color. It's a process that I've really loved and have learned what I need to do to get the results I need for, particularly like the last slide that you saw, the women and girls. There is it's just a beauty in seeing, thank you, Ellen, and seeing what you can achieve by having just a certain amount of color and a certain amount of place, let it dry, put it in, and all of that can be done in hours as opposed to 2 days, which is what generally happens with glass. So that's my answer with the choice of one over the other. Ellen, you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, it just varies each medium as well, but for sure, like when I do the collages, I go back to the paper fabric collages. The reason I started doing those, actually, I had found an old box of things from my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who was he did calligraphy and photography before the war, and he had left a box of old weathered calligraphy paper, and I found these rolls. And I just thought, well, I'm not going to just let this sit here. I'm going to use paper. So I just started experimenting with his paper. And I just got the feeling of his spirit was right there. And I started working with his paper. And then I started using many tiny pieces of vintage Japanese textiles that I had collected for many years. And I felt like I could tell a story of, my connection to my ancestors in this way, using different techniques, embroidery techniques, using Japanese inks, whatever. And then that sort of developed into the style that it has become. So that is like a real intimate sort of a way for me to sketch. Since I painted years ago, but it's not my favorite, like Tomyé's favorite. But I do love working with putting things together and having and some weaving in my past as well. There's always that feeling of connecting with the textiles And to me, weaving and textiles is so universal over the whole world that it just, that connects me even more deeply to those traditions, not only in my culture, but in other cultures. And then when I do the hand cut paper, that medium is usually my statement is so different. I mean, it's usually charged with something very highly political. So I'm specifically writing words, or I'm doing like the first slides I showed you with the portraits in hand cut paper. That is a whole different approach to doing my art, but equally as satisfying, but each one I think accomplishes, I hope, its own objective to getting certain information or feelings across. Thank you. I hope that.
Thank you, Ellen. So we have another question from Alex. Thank you for your presentation. How do you incorporate your communities into your art practice? And do you take community input when creating your pieces?
For me, I don't think nowadays, I wouldn't say I incorporate my community's direct input, but I'm always in touch with like the Asian American community, at least before COVID, at least before our change in lifestyle. But so there's this network or community that I do feed off of. Just hearing people's personal stories, or it's always informing what is important for me to express through my art. And that's one way. And then, well, that's my short answer. Tomyé, why don't you go ahead and I can add.
Okay. I mentioned earlier that I joined the Northern California Women's Caucus for the Arts. And that was principally, it's an organization that's been around for a long, long time. And when I moved to San Francisco in the mid 70s, I knew about the organization, but I felt that my work was not appropriate because a lot of what they do is primarily political art, or at least the Northern California branch does. And I really didn't think I was ready. I would not fit in well with what they were doing and putting out. And because of my connection with them, I would say that's the closest that I do with regard to a larger, when I think of community, I think of a larger group of people as opposed to individuals. The individuals, I still teach a man that when I first started, he's in his 80s. When I first started teaching him, it unfortunately, and I say unfortunate because it wound up being a Zoom instead of in person, teaching him and still teach him, but he has developed Alzheimer's, and the belief that Alzheimer's is slowed if you do something creative because it uses a part of your brain that needs to be stimulated with creative activity. It's kind of an interesting experiment in the sense of seeing if that's really true, if it's slowing his abilities and his relationship with his wife and things like that. And it seems like it has, but I'm the artist. I'm not a scientist or anything to know if that's true. I also have other people, like the image I showed of the young girl in her father's shoes with her mother holding her up. That was a direct, but it was a one person giving me insight into creating that particular artwork. So for right now, that's the extent of my involvement with community. I've done obviously community with Oakland Parks and Rec, but not to inform my art per se. And then Erica says, I see both interesting approaches. Thanks. And I think that's the last of our questions
Okay.
or comments.
Great.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Tomyé. Let's give a big, round of applause for both of them for putting up, so much time, effort, energy in this curating this workshop. Thank you so much to all the participants for being there. Your presence means a lot. Any kind of workshop is successful only, when it is engaging and when everybody, contributes. So thank you for your voice and, your thought and sharing with us with that. So thank you, Brendis, again. Thank you, Jamie, for all your support to run this workshop seamlessly. Thank you.